Today on What Went Wrong, we talk about more legal shit. Hi, I'm Brett Mauser, and I've made over 40 feature films, and I haven't always done it quite the right way in terms of legalities. And I don't mean that in terms of, like breaking the law type stuff. It's just when it came to protecting myself legally, especially in the early days. Once we officially made Ponderous, we started doing things a little bit, a little bit more the right way. Because when you're starting off as a filmmaker, you just say, "Hey, let's get some people together and go make a movie." But you are setting yourself up for a lot of lawsuits and things like that. Yeah, if something happens on your set, you're responsible. So I think this is a perfect time for you to introduce yourself. If you're familiar with the Ponders films, the Not So Sane films, we might recognize your face.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's not acting is not your main profession.
So my name is Denise. If we're doing last names, it's also Villarreal. You can find me on the State Bar website for the state of Texas. So there's no hiding that. I am an attorney. I'm licensed in the state of Florida and the state of Texas. I do primarily civil litigation. I have dabbled in criminal litigation, and it's not for me. But I have been an actor since I was in high school, and really, really love it. I've done a lot of theater. I did a lot of theater in Florida, and I've worked with Brett on several productions, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, as needed. Nothing too technical behind the camera.
Like everybody has to hold boom at least some point in their Ponderous Not So Sane career.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And then, but no, so what it's done is it's put me in a position where I've had the opportunity to really look into, because I love contract law, so that's really nerdy, but I really love contract law. So it gives me, entertainment contracts are very unique. I mean, all industries have their own quirks, but entertainment contracts, there's like so many of them within just that industry, right? So there's the agency contracts, there's the selling rights, selling ownership of property, like intellectual property. And so you're actually touching on like labor laws and employment law and intellectual property law, and it's just all kind of wrapped up in this one industry. And that makes it really, really interesting, but it also makes it really complex. So it's been fun to kind of like start wading into that world, in addition to what I normally do, which I started in construction law, which introduced me to kind of the intricacies of the interplay between statutory requirements and how that works with contracts between the builders and the subcontractors and the owners, homeowners and whatnot. So I'm a big mess.
Well, when it comes to film, you said a word right there, subcontractors. Basically we've got, when you're making a film and you're working with actors and people come on just for, your one project, you're dealing mostly with contractors, right? Mm-hmm. So you usually have a contract that explains, what an actor will get in return for their services. But before we jump into that, I want to start at the very basics of establishing your company.
Oh yeah.
When we very first originally did Ponders Productions, buddy of mine Ty A. Fish, we started it in Denver, Colorado, with Ponders Productions, and it was just I think it was just a partnership at that point.
Just a partnership, yeah.
But it wasn't an LLC.
Or an LP.
So we that only lasted
LP,
like a month
limited
or so.
Partnership.
Then limited liability company for LLC.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I came back to Texas in 2001, 2002, that's when we opened up Ponders Productions as an LLC. And all the films were done under that banner. Now, you recommend that that's not the way you do it.
No, you definitely want to isolate it. So the way it's traditionally done, and you can look to kind of the Hollywood example. My understanding is, while you have a major production company, they still have separate LLCs for each production. And what that does is it isolates the liabilities and the assets for that production, so that other productions are not affected by a lawsuit. So you're filming one film and I don't know, you set fire to the location where you're filming, and so they come after you for accidental damages from the fire. Well, if you have it all under one umbrella, then all of the proceeds from other projects or the assets that you've collected in order to make other projects are now at risk. And so by creating a separate LLC for each individual project, you're able to create a wall between them and kind of isolate them. There are 13 states in the United States that recognize the Series LLC, and it was originally designed for real estate investors to isolate their individual properties that they're investing in. And I actually think that is a good vehicle for a filmmaker or a film production company to do the same thing, isolate their individual projects while still having everything roll up into a master when you're doing state reporting. Each one has an EIN, so you're still paying federal taxes separately. You still need to have an operating agreement for that particular cell. I still tell all of my clients, separate bank account, separate checking, separate savings, whatever. Everything needs to be isolated and separate because that really reinforces that wall between the cells. But yeah, so I definitely don't think you should have everything under one umbrella.
Now, one of the things that I think of is when I'm hearing about the legalese and doing all that, and I have separate bank accounts. First thing that's jumping into my mind is the time and money involved in that. So what would you say to somebody like myself who's going to say, but man, and to open up an LLC for everyone, I think it's, when we first opened up our first one, Ponderous Productions in 2002, 2003, it cost us like $1,500 to do.
Well, yeah, because if you can't do it yourself, you're paying somebody to draw up the paperwork, somebody to do your operating agreement, somebody to do all the paperwork stuff, and then you have to pay the state for the registration fee. That is actually the beauty of the Series LLC, because you do it once and then you create the series underneath it, but you don't have to pay to incorporate each one individually, which is a money saver, especially, which is why real estate investors love it, because they don't have to start a new LLC for each property. But yeah, no, it's expensive. But the thing is, it's an investment in security for you as the production company, because look at it this way. My example of the accidental arson, right? I mean, that can result in potentially millions of dollars. And if it's not contained, it can leach into all of your other projects and potentially bankrupt the company. But that extra time and effort to isolate things can just mean that project is dead. And you might have to excise it, but the other projects can continue to go ahead without being dragged down and gutted. So yeah, it's a cost benefit analysis. Can you take the risk? Might you be okay? Yeah, but at the end of the day, is that a risk you want to continue to take as you get bigger, right? So if you're doing your first film, maybe be really, really careful. But I highly suggest taking the time to at least create the LLC. You can find forms online. They're not going to be the best, but it's going to give you some modicum of protection. And pay the state registration fee. So pay the $20 to get the I don't know, the fill in the blank form online from one of those legal form companies for the state of Texas, like LegalZoom or something. It's not going to be great, but it's going to be something, right? So pay the $20 for that, pay your state registration fee, and you have some protection for it. And it doesn't cost anything to open a bank account. I think you have to put $20 in. So you take your operating agreement that you got from LegalZoom, which is, again, not going to be great, and it's not going to be tailored to what you need, which is why you hire an attorney. But you take that to the bank and you open your bank account. It's not going to cost you anything to do that. Is it time? Sure. But at the same time, you're isolating it from your personal assets, which is huge, because you don't want to go bankrupt because you set fire to somebody's place and now your kids can't go to college, or now, you guys have to move into an apartment, stuff like that. It's you really want to protect your home life from this endeavor. But yeah, so I mean, LegalZoom, Google, find the documents to get some basic coverage or basic protection, set up the separate bank accounts, and create an iron curtain between your personal assets and the assets for the business. In film schools and any kind of official educational place are always talking about insuring your production. Does that insurance actually protect you in any way? You have to read the coverage. You have to read what you're actually getting from what you're paying them. I don't like playing with insurance. I actually do. We accept legal insurance, but I mean, people don't realize that you're paying these premiums, but they don't realize what coverage they're getting. So it's like your health insurance. You really want to read it and figure out what's covered because I mean, a lot of people don't realize that if you go skydiving, you're not covered. So when you get insurance for a project, make sure you know what's covered because if they don't know that you're going to be setting things on fire or that you're going to make things explode, you may not be covered for that.
Yeah.
And then if somebody gets hurt, like if you electrocute someone, and they get and they don't recover from it, then your company is now going to be liable out of pocket for those damages and those expenses because the insurance will not cover it. And the insurance does not like to cover things. So they're going to find any way they can to get out. So you have to read very carefully or have an attorney look at it before you sign and start giving them money.
Yeah, and that's why it's difficult for for me to justify going out and getting insurance because it doesn't really protect you that much. They're always going to try to weasel their way out of it. But the issue is just a lot of locations that will say, "Well, we need to be on your insurance policy." I don't have an insurance policy, So I guess the question is are you legally allowed to make a movie without insurance?
Yes. So you are legally allowed. Where you're going to run into is like what you said. You're gonna have fewer options for locations to film. Fewer. The ability is going to be restricted to hire certain subcontractors. They're going to be like, well, I don't want to work for a production that doesn't have insurance. But you also, one of the beauties of insurance is that you can get it very specifically for this project for this length of time. And so you can say, okay, well, we really want this location. So, we have it in the budget to pay this much in insurance. We just have to make sure we're done shooting in that first month because then we can cancel the insurance. So there is some flexibility that way, but so yes, legally you can, but again, it's weighing cost benefits, because if you absolutely need a gun range and there's no other way to do the scene without a gun range or the story kind of revolves around a gun range, you're gonna have to have insurance. And then the insurance you're gonna have is gonna be pretty extensive because you're gonna be around firearms, and around lead. Right. So it's like making those choices. Like if you absolutely have to do it, then you got to make sure it's in the budget.
As we moved along, we went with deferred. Originally in the Ponders universe, Ponders films, we would defer actors. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
What I love about contracts is that the people that draft the contracts, you have complete power over the rules that are going to govern your relationship. Right. So are there standards? Are there general ways that things are done? Yes. And you can thank the unions for that because they kind of created the standards of practice in Hollywood, and that's kind of trickled out to non-union stuff. So deferred is basically you do the job and you're going to get paid later. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can get paid with residuals. You can get paid as a percentage of gross sales from just the release. You can get paid, how else have I seen it? Those are the two big ways. But there's definitely because it's kind of like your baby, right? Because you're negotiating it. It can be whatever you want. It's just you got to get the other party to come on board and sign. And so a lot of times that's that negotiation going back and forth, and then you're talking about bargaining power because if you're a big studio, you don't have to concede on anything. I'll get another actor, right? So you're an independent filmmaker and the acting pool is kind of small, maybe you're a little bit more restricted and you have to concede more. So where does minimum wage fall in with that? Minimum wage. So because you're not a W-2 employee, you're able to contract your wage. So as an attorney, for example, I can choose to take a flat fee. And that flat fee can mean that I'm making below minimum wage, but I've contracted with this person to make this much for this project. If it ends up taking me 3 times as long as I anticipated, it doesn't matter. This is what I contracted for. And that's kind of how independent contractors work. You either have quoted the job, a plumber will quote a job, and that may mean they end up making less than minimum wage on that. But guess what? That's what they contracted for. You can try to renegotiate, but that's it. But when you are a W-2 employee or specifically a W-2 employee, you have a lot of protections because you're entitled by the virtue of that relationship to make minimum wage, right? So that's kind of the contract that the employer makes with the state. If I take an employee on as a minimum wage employee, then as a W-2 employee, then I'm going to meet these basic requirements. But actually, a really good discussion to have is the difference between a W-2 employee or an employee and a contractor. Because I think one of the things that came up with the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was that everybody was like, well, I'll just make everybody an independent contractor. Then I don't have to deal with it. But that's not how it works, because, and that was one of the things that we were talking about was going to keep the IRS expanding, was because they're going to have people going in and evaluating whether your employees were in fact contractors or employees. So you can't just say my secretary's an independent contractor. There's actually factors that they look at, like how much control do you have over how she does her job? Do you dictate her schedule? Do you provide all the equipment for them to do their jobs? So and everything's a spectrum, right? Because sometimes we'll provide the safety equipment, but you have to bring your own tools. Or I had a window washer client. He was like, oh, well, I was a W-2 employee and they tried to make me an independent contractor. And I said, well, and I started asking him some questions, and he said, well, they provided the safety harnesses, but then they took them out of my pay. I was like, so they're your safety harnesses. And so, I mean, you get into some muddy areas, and that's why the IRS was going to have to start hiring more people, because they were going to have to make these evaluations to determine whether those employers were required to provide health care for those independent contractors that were actually employees. So in the entertainment industry, a lot of the people that you hire are going to be independent contractors. Actors, interestingly enough, most of the time meet the requirements to be an employee. But because tradition has dictated it this way, they are considered independent contractors. And so you pay them for the project, and that's what they're getting, and they negotiate their pay. What would be different would be like a PA, right? PA sits there and waits for you to tell them what to do, right? And they can take some initiative, but outside of that, it's very much dictated by who they're assigned to, right? So it's a little bit harder to justify that person is an independent contractor. But the entertainment industry is very much its own animal, right? So you got to have there's so much gray area there. It's not like an office job. Mm-hmm. So, but understanding that can keep you out of a lot of trouble before you move into some of the other contractual areas.
A lot of people, even, especially if they don't, maybe they don't have the LLC and they're just making their film, whatever. Whether you've got the LLC, whether you're just a sole proprietor, whatever it is, if you make a film and you go and you go and download or bootleg Adobe software and edit your film on bootlegged Adobe software, you are in big trouble. Yeah. Because if let's say you make $1 million on that movie, it's gone.
Adobe just made $1 million.
Adobe just made it, because there was actually a company in Mexico that used some illegal software, made money on a film. That company found out that it was bootleg software, and that company's no longer in existence.
Well, the biggest comparison for that is if you think about using somebody's score or somebody's script and not paying them royalties for it or not contracting for it. It's the same thing. It's using software, using images, using copyrighted techniques or patented techniques without paying royalties. I mean, they're going to come after you. My favorite is the University of Texas. There was a restaurant on 35 called Bevo's. That restaurant lasted about a year, but they were in litigation almost immediately because the University of Texas has I think they have an entire legal department within their legal department who fights for their copyright and their trademarks. And so it's like, if a university is that litigious about it, what about a company whose sole income is reliant on this software? I mean, you don't think they're going to be looking for opportunities to protect themselves? Was it Xerox? I don't know if you heard about this. There was a New York Times crossword puzzle, and one of the clues was to photocopy. And the answer was Xerox. Well, Xerox took out a full page ad and was like, Xerox is a brand name, photocopier is the product. And I don't think people kind of really understand that. It's like, just because you have a copy of it, if you didn't pay for the license, you can be like, oi.
I will not go and get illegal stuff. First, because if anyone's ever seen any of my shows before, they know how stringent I am on copyright protection. but you need that license. And when you're downloading royalty-free music, they'll have different types of licenses, and you have to make sure this is for broadcasts only, this is for internet distribution, this is for this is for that. I was just looking at some voiceover work. Some people who just, hey, $20 for voiceover work, and you go down and you got to see, internet stuff or commercial. It's commercial. It's going to be another $50, and they're just like these little a la carte things. And you can't blame them. That's how they're doing that business. But it prices me out of the market. Then it's like I'm not going to pay for that. Yeah. But yeah, when it comes to the Adobe Premiere, like where I teach, they give us Adobe Premiere as the teacher pack. But I have my own personal Adobe thing license, because that license for the teacher does not cover the work that I do commercially.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful of that as well. Yeah. And yeah, so when people are just like, well, I'm going to download this script writing program and write the script. They find out about it.
It is not worth it. It really isn't. It's because you might not get caught, but you might get caught. And
because they have a hotline.
I get caught.
Yeah, they have a hotline to turn people in.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working for a company that that they're using software, and they have sometimes like $5,000 rewards or something like that, and if you think you have made everybody on your set happy with you,
you're deluded,
and that they're not gonna turn you in for a quick $5K,
especially if you're an independent filmmaker, you're not paying them enough.
Yeah. So they catch wind of that. Oh, you're using illegal script software. I can make $5,000 if I turn them in. Guess what? Not worth it. Protect yourself. Do things smart, and don't have that mentality of, well, nobody will notice. Nobody will care. They do, and they will.